After 20 years of marriage, it took just one mysterious envelope to shatter everything I believed in. As a former detective, I've solved hundreds of cases, but nothing prepared me for investigating my own wife's betrayal. The evidence was undeniable, but the hardest case of my life wasn't finding the truth. It was deciding what to do once I had it. 20 years together, 30 seconds to end all. My name is Jack Reynolds, and at 56, I thought I had life figured out. After 30 years on the force, 15 as a detective in Chicago's homicide division, I'd retired with honors and started my own PI business. I'd seen the worst of humanity, put killers behind bars, and somehow managed to keep my moral compass pointing north. My colleagues call me Bulldog because once I sank my teeth into a case, I never let go until I found the truth. That determination made me a damn good cop and an even better private investigator. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was in my home office reviewing files for a corporate embezzlement case when I noticed an unfamiliar envelope mixed in with the mail. No return address, just Caroline's name printed in elegant script. My wife of 20 years was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from what she claimed was a late-night inventory at her art gallery. I shouldn't have opened it. In 20 years of marriage, I'd never violated Caroline's privacy. But something about that envelope, the expensive paper, the handwritten address, triggered the detective instinct I'd relied on for decades. Inside was a receipt from the Waldorf downtown, a hotel neither of us had ever stayed at, and a handwritten note. Last night was unforgettable. Your passion for beauty extends far beyond art. Until next week, D. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I sat down heavily in my leather chair, the one Caroline had given me when I opened the PI office. My hands, steady during countless crime scene investigations, trembled slightly. Caroline appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her silk robe, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. Morning, handsome, making coffee. Her smile, once the highlight of my day, now looked like evidence of deception. For a split second, I considered confronting her immediately, throwing the note on the desk between us. But the detective in me held back. If there's one thing I'd learned in my career, it's never to show your hand too early. Just checking some case files, I answered, sliding the envelope under a folder. Coffee sounds great. As she walked to the kitchen, I made a decision. Before confronting Caroline, I needed more evidence. After all, a single note could have an innocent explanation. But in my gut, and my gut had rarely led me wrong, I knew our marriage was about to face its toughest investigation yet. I spent the morning playing the role of unsuspecting husband while my mind worked the case. Years of undercover work had taught me how to wear a mask. As Caroline kissed me goodbye before heading to her gallery, I smiled and wished her a good day, like I'd done thousands of times before. The moment her car pulled away, I went into investigation mode. First stop, her home office. Caroline was meticulous about her gallery's finances, keeping detailed records of sales, acquisitions, and client interactions. I found her appointment calendar and flipped back through recent months. There was a pattern. Every Thursday afternoon showed a block period labeled simply D, private viewing. Next, I checked her phone records online. Multiple calls to a number I didn't recognize, always ending just before she arrived home. The calls had started about 7 months ago, right around the time Caroline had begun exhibiting works by new artists. I wrote down the number and ran it through one of the databases I still had access to from my PI work. The owner, Daniel Ashford, 52, wealthy real estate developer and art collector. A quick social media search showed him to be exactly the type: silver-haired, country club membership, vacation homes in 3 countries. His collection had been featured in several magazines, and he was considered a major player in the art world. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more. Something irrefutable. I made a phone call to an old colleague, Marco, who owed me more favors than he could count. Jack Reynolds, he answered. Retirement made you soft yet? Not even close, I replied. Need some surveillance work, off the books. Personal matter. Marco didn't ask questions. That's why we'd worked so well together for 15 years. Text me the details. Consider it done. I spent the rest of the day running my legitimate PI business while my mind worked the puzzle. When Caroline returned home that evening, she brought takeout from my favorite Italian place and a bottle of good scotch. Thought we could use a date night, she said, smiling as she kicked off her heels. I watched her move around our kitchen, setting out plates, pouring drinks. Her silver blonde hair caught the light, still as beautiful as when we'd met. Was she really so comfortable lying to my face? Or was there an innocent explanation I was missing? During dinner, she chatted about gallery business, a new artist she was considering, and plans for our upcoming anniversary. 20 years married, she reminded me. Perhaps we should take that trip to Maine we'd always talked about? I nodded and smiled, playing along while studying her every expression. The detective in me noticed tiny tells, the way she avoided extended eye contact, how she kept redirecting the conversation to safe topics, her slight overcompensation with affection. Everything okay at the gallery? I asked casually. She hesitated for just a millisecond before answering. Never better. Sales are up, and we've attracted some important new collectors. I bet you have, I thought, but kept my expression neutral. Anyone interesting? She shrugged. The usual types. People with more money than taste. Mostly. Another lie. Each one was a knife twist, but I kept my face a mask. Tomorrow was Thursday, her standing appointment with D. Marco would be in position, and soon I'd have the evidence I needed. For tonight, I continue the charade. 20 years of marriage deserved at least the courtesy of ironclad proof before I blew it all up. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I left the house before Caroline woke, telling her I had an early client meeting. Instead, I parked down the street from Marco's unmarked van near the gallery. Morning, Jack. Marco's voice crackled through the secure line we'd established. Your wife arrived at 9:15. Normal routine so far. I checked my watch. 11:30. According to her calendar, Dee would arrive at noon for his private viewing. Any sign of Ashford? I asked. Not yet. You sure you want to do this, Jack? Sometimes ignorance is. Don't. I cut him off. 20 years deserves the truth. At 11:58, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the gallery. The silver-haired man emerging from it matched Daniel Ashford's photos exactly. He straightened his tailored suit, glanced around casually, then entered the gallery. Got him, Marco confirmed. Wanting to follow inside? No, I replied, my voice steady despite the churning in my gut. The gallery has security cameras. I can access them later if needed. For the next hour, I sat in my car, feeling like I was conducting the most painful stakeout of my career. At 1:05, Marco's voice broke the silence. Jack, they're closing the blinds. All of them. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. A private viewing, indeed. At 2:45, Ashford finally emerged, looking relaxed and satisfied. He checked his watch, then made a phone call as he walked to his car. Marco zoomed in with his camera, capturing every movement. Want me to follow him? Marco asked. No, I said. I've seen enough. I drove to my PI office, where I accessed the gallery's security system remotely. I'd installed it myself years ago, insisting on the best for Caroline's safety. Now I used those same cameras to confirm my suspicions. The footage showed the initial tour, Caroline's animated descriptions of various artworks, Ashford's attentive posture. Then they moved to her private office in the back, carrying wine glasses. Before closing the door, Ashford pulled Caroline into a passionate kiss that she eagerly returned. I shut off the monitor, the evidence irrefutable. 20 years of trust dismantled in 20 seconds of video. When I arrived home that evening, I was calm, the dangerous calm my former partners recognized as my most focused state. I poured myself a scotch and waited for the sound of Caroline's key in the lock. Caroline breezed in at 7:30, carrying a small gift bag. Jack, I found this amazing vintage watch at an estate sale today. It's perfect for your collection. Her smile faltered when she saw my expression. I stood perfectly still, holding the glass of scotch, saying nothing. Years of interrogations had taught me the power of silence. Is everything okay? She asked, setting down her purse. I took a slow sip of my drink. How was your private viewing today? Her face showed confusion, then caution. It went well. A potential buyer for the Morrison collection. Daniel Ashford, I said flatly, seems very interested in your collection. The color drained from her face. Jack, what are you? I placed my phone on the counter between us, the security footage queued up. 20 years together, Caroline. Didn't mean anything. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't need to see what was on it. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Not long enough to be numb to it, I replied. but long enough to know it's not a one-time mistake. She sank into a chair. It's not what you think, Jack. Really? I laughed without humor. Because it looks exactly like the wife I trusted for 2 decades is sleeping with a client. What part am I misunderstanding? Daniel and we have a connection. I raised my hand, cutting her off. Spare me. I've heard every excuse in the interrogation room. Never thought I'd hear them in my own home. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air between us. What was I going to do? The carefully constructed life we'd built was shattering, and no amount of detective work could piece it back together. I'm going to finish this drink, I said evenly, and then I'm going to pack a bag. The rest will be up to lawyers. Jack, please, we can work through this. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but the cold certainty of a case closed. No, Caroline, we can't. Jack, please, can we just talk about this? Caroline followed me up the stairs to our bedroom. Her voice had taken on that pleading tone I'd heard from countless suspects over the years, the one that comes when they realize their carefully constructed lies are crumbling. I pulled my old army duffel from the closet and began methodically packing essentials. Shirts, pants, toiletries. My movements were precise, controlled. When you've processed hundreds of crime scenes, you learn to compartmentalize, to function despite the chaos around you. There's nothing to talk about, I said, folding a shirt with military precision. The evidence speaks for itself. Caroline grabbed my arm. It's not just physical, Jack. Daniel and we connect intellectually. He understands the art world, my ambitions. I stopped and faced her directly. 20 years, Caroline. 20 years I supported your dreams. I built the security system for your gallery. I attended every opening, even when I was dead on my feet from a case. I learned about art movements and brush techniques because it mattered to you. But you were always working, always so wrapped up in your cases. Tears streamed down her face, mascara creating dark rivers on her cheeks. I was lonely. I zipped up the duffel. So you found comfort in Daniel Ashford's bed. Got it. That's not fair. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Fair? You want to talk about fair? How about the fairness of betraying 2 decades of trust? How about the fairness of looking me in the eye every day while lying to my face? I grabbed my watch collection from the dresser, the one thing besides my badge that held sentimental value, and tucked it into the bag. Jack, 20 years isn't something you just throw away. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start. I stopped at the bedroom door and turned to face her. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I allowed myself to really feel the pain, let it wash through me for just a moment. Here's what's going to happen, Caroline. I'll be staying at the residence in downtown for now. My lawyer will contact yours. We'll divide assets fairly. I'll never speak ill of you to our friends. I'll even leave you the house if you want it. But we're done. Just like that, she whispered. 20 years together, and you can end it in 30 seconds? I looked at my watch, a habit from timing interrogations. 27 seconds, actually. And yes, because you already ended it the first time you met Ashford after hours. I headed down the stairs, Caroline's sobs following me. At the front door, I paused to look around at the home we'd built together. Photos from vacations, artwork she'd carefully selected, the leather chair where I'd read case files every evening. A life, constructed over 2 decades, now revealed to be built on shifting sand. I did love you, Caroline, I said quietly. Never doubt that. I walked out the door without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see her silhouette in the doorway, getting smaller as I drove away. 20 years together, 30 seconds to end it. Now she'd see me leave for good. I ended up at Manny's Diner around midnight, the kind of place I'd frequented during late-night stakeouts. The overnight waitress, Doris, had been serving cops coffee for 30 years and had heard more confessions than most priests. Jack Reynolds, she said, sliding a coffee in front of me without being asked. Haven't seen you since retirement. Working a case. Something like that. I replied, wrapping my hands around the mug. She studied my face, then nodded at my duffel bag on the booth beside me. Must be a rough one. I gave her a half-smile. The roughest. Doris had the wisdom not to pry. She kept my coffee filled and left me to my thoughts until the diner emptied out around 2 a.m. Then she slid into the booth across from me. Spill it, detective. You look like hell. I told her everything. The note, the surveillance, the confrontation. It poured out of me, like a suspect's confession under pressure. Doris listened without interruption, her weathered face showing neither shock nor judgment. When I finished, she nodded slowly. My Henry, God rest him. He stepped out on me once, early in our marriage. Found lipstick on his collar, just like in those old movies. What did you do? I asked. Threw him out, she said matter-of-factly. Made him sleep in his truck for a week. Then we talked, really talked for the first time in years. You took him back. 30 more good years together before cancer got him. She patted my hand. Not saying that's your path, Jack. Just saying there's no manual for this stuff. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Please come home. We need to talk. I showed it to Doris, who shrugged. Ball's in your court, detective. She made her choice, I said, pocketing the phone without responding. Yes, she did. Doris agreed. Now you're making yours. She refilled my coffee and left me to my thoughts. Through the window, I could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the city. Another day beginning. Life continuing, despite feeling like mine had stopped. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marco. You okay, partner? Need backup. That made me smile. Even now, I wasn't alone. I had colleagues who had my back, friends I could count on. Maybe that was enough for now. I texted back. I'm good. Thanks for yesterday. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. I would be good, eventually. I just needed time. 3 days at the residence and felt like 3 years. I established a routine. Early morning run, breakfast to the corner cafe, then work at my PI office until evening. I'd taken on a new insurance fraud case, something complex enough to keep my mind occupied. The client needed results yesterday, which suited me fine. Work had always been my salvation. I was reviewing surveillance photos when my office door opened without a knock. Only one person ever entered that way. You look like hell, said Frank Matthews, my former partner, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. At 60, Frank had retired from the force 2 years before me, but still carried himself like a cop. Alert, observant, ready for trouble. I've looked worse, I replied, not looking up from the photos. Frank dropped into the chair across from my desk. Caroline called me. That got my attention. And she's worried about you. Says you won't return her calls. I leaned back, studying Frank's weathered face. Nothing to say. Frank nodded slowly. She told me everything, Jack. The affair, the confrontation, you walking out. Then you understand why I'm not taking her calls. Frank sighed, running a hand over his thinning gray hair. 26 years, I was married to Susan before cancer took her. Would have given anything for more time. So yeah, I get why you're angry. But 20 years is a lot to throw away without a conversation. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the city below. This isn't one of our cases, Frank. There's no mystery to solve, no perp to catch. It's just a marriage that's over. Is it? Frank asked quietly. Or are you doing what you always do, shutting down when emotions get too complicated? I turned, anger flaring. She was sleeping with another man in her office, Frank. What's complicated about that? The why of it, for starters, he replied, unruffled by my outburst. Look, I'm not defending what she did. It was wrong, period. But good investigators look for motives, not just evidence. I shook my head. Don't need a motive. Got all the evidence I need. Frank stood, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. Jack, remember the Donovan case? Guy confessed to killing his wife, had the bloody knife in his hand when uniforms arrived. Seemed open and shut. Until we found out he was covering for his terminally ill son. I finished. That was different. Was it? We almost sent an innocent man to prison because we stopped investigating once we had a confession. Don't make the same mistake here. I turned away, uncomfortable with the parallel. What's your point, Frank? My point is, you're a damn good detective. Maybe use those skills before you close this case for good. He headed for the door, then paused. Caroline asked me to give you this. He placed a small envelope on my desk. I didn't touch it. She also mentioned a gallery opening tonight. Some new artist she discovered. Said you'd know where. After Frank left, I stared at the envelope for a full 5 minutes before opening it. Inside was a key, not to our house, but to the small cabin we owned in Michigan. We'd spent our honeymoon there. The attached note read simply, I'll be here this weekend if you want to talk. No pressure, no excuses, just truth. I tucked the key into my pocket, unsure what to do with it. or with the conflicting emotions battling inside me. I told myself I was just doing reconnaissance when I parked across from Caroline's gallery that evening. The opening was in full swing. Cars lined the street, and well-dressed patrons streamed through the doors. From my vantage point, I could see Caroline through the window, elegant in a black dress, smiling as she introduced a young artist to potential buyers. 20 years of marriage had taught me her expressions. The smile was professional, not reaching her eyes. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makeup couldn't hide. I was about to drive away when I spotted him, Daniel Ashford, moving confidently through the crowd toward Caroline. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as he approached her, champagne flute in hand. What happened next wasn't what I expected. Caroline's smile vanished. She said something brief to Ashford, then turned away. He grabbed her elbow, his expression darkening. She pulled free, maintaining a professional demeanor despite obvious tension. Instinct took over. I was out of the car and across the street before I'd consciously decided to move. 20 years as a cop, and 5 more as a PI had taught me to recognize potential trouble, and Ashford's body language was setting off every alarm. I entered the gallery quietly, keeping to the periphery. The space was crowded with Chicago's art elite, admiring paintings that cost more than most people's annual salary. No one noticed the slightly rumpled man in a sports jacket moving through their midst. Caroline was cornered near her office by Ashford, whose voice was low but intense. "You're making a mistake. I can ruin you in this town with one phone call." Her reply was equally quiet but firm. "I think you should leave, Daniel. This is a professional event." "Professional," he sneered. "Like our private viewings? Don't act high and mighty now, Caroline. Your husband's gone. You've got nothing to lose." "She's got me," I said, stepping into their space. "And I suggest you follow her advice and leave." Ashford's head snapped toward me, surprise quickly masked by arrogance. "Reynolds, come to beg her back." "Jack," Caroline whispered, eyes wide. "You came." I kept my attention on Ashford. "I'm only going to say this once. Walk away now, or I make a call to the art fraud division at the FBI. I'm sure they'd be interested in those authenticated to gas sketches you sold the Wilsons last month." His face paled. "You're bluffing." I smiled coldly. "Try me." Ashford looked from me to Caroline, then set down his champagne flute with careful precision. "This isn't over. For your sake, it better be," I replied. He slipped away through the crowd. Caroline exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she said. "He's been difficult since you left." I studied her face, searching for the truth. "You ended it with him?" She nodded. "The day after you walked out." I realized. She trailed off, glancing around to the crowded gallery. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I hesitated, Frank's words echoing in my mind. Good investigators look for motives, not just evidence. "Your office," I suggested. As we moved toward the back of the gallery, I noticed the new artist's work for the first time. Stark, powerful paintings exploring themes of betrayal and redemption. In one, a broken mirror reflected not a single image, but fragments of different faces, suggesting that truth depended on perspective. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe there was more to investigate here. The Michigan cabin looked exactly as I remembered. Weathered cedar siding, stone chimney, the small dock extending into the lake. As I killed the engine, memories flooded back, carrying Caroline across the threshold 20 years ago, morning coffees on the porch watching mist rise from the water, evenings by the fireplace planning our future. I sat in the car for several minutes, debating whether this was a mistake. Frank's words kept echoing. Good investigators look for motives. Caroline's car was already parked under the old oak tree. No turning back now. She opened the door before I knocked, face bare of makeup, hair pulled back simply. Not the polished gallery owner, just the woman I'd married. "You came," she said softly. "I'm not promising anything," I warned, stepping inside. The cabin smelled of pine and coffee, with a hint of the stew simmering on the old cast-iron stove. "I know," she gestured toward the living room. "I just appreciate you hearing me out." We sat across from each other, me in the leather chair, her on the sofa where we'd spent countless hours reading, talking, making plans. Between us lay 2 decades of shared history and one devastating betrayal. "Why, Caroline?" I asked simply. No preamble, no accusations. Just the question that had burned through me since finding that note. She didn't flinch. The simplest answer? I felt invisible. To who? To me. To myself. She replied, surprising me. When we met, I was just starting the gallery. I had dreams, ambition. Then success came, and suddenly I was respected, sought after. Everyone wanted something from Caroline, the gallery owner, but no one saw Caroline the woman anymore. She took a shaky breath. Including me. And Ashford made you feel seen. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Temporarily, she admitted. He was exciting, different. He made me feel desired, not just respected. But it was an illusion, Jack. He didn't want me. He wanted what I could do for his collection, his reputation. When did you realize that? The night you left, she said quietly. I called him, falling apart. And do you know what he said? This is unfortunate timing. I was hoping to acquire the Morrison collection before things got complicated. Her laugh was bitter. That's when I knew what a fool I'd been. I leaned forward. Why should I believe you now? Because I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, meeting my gaze steadily. I'm asking for honesty from both of us. 20 years is too much to throw away without at least trying to understand why we got here. For the first time since discovering her affair, I felt something besides anger and betrayal. Not forgiveness, that would take much longer, if it came at all, but willingness to listen. I'm not making any promises, I repeated, but I'll stay for the weekend. We can talk. The relief in her eyes was palpable. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. As I unpacked in the guest room, I gazed out at the lake where we'd once sworn to love each other forever. I didn't know if we could find our way back from this, but 20 years deserve at least this much. The courage to face our broken marriage honestly, whatever the outcome. 6 months after that weekend at the cabin, I stood in the doorway of my PI office, watching Caroline hang a painting on the wall opposite my desk. Are you sure this is where you want it? She asked, adjusting the frame. It's rather intense for a waiting room. It's exactly where I want it, I replied. The painting, created by the young artist from her gallery, depicted a broken mirror being painstakingly pieced back together. Each fragment reflected something different. Moments of joy, pain, betrayal, and healing. It wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but it was honest. Real. Like our relationship now. We hadn't magically fixed everything that weekend at the cabin. Instead, we'd begun the painful process of true honesty. About her affair, yes, but also about the years of emotional distance that had preceded it. I'd acknowledge my part, retreating into work rather than facing the changing dynamics of our relationship. She'd taken full responsibility for her betrayal, without excuses or deflection. We'd agreed on 3 months apart, with weekly counseling sessions both individually and together. I'd stayed at the Residence Inn, focusing on my PI business and rebuilding my sense of self outside our marriage. Caroline had sold the gallery and started a smaller consultation business, working with emerging artists, something she'd always wanted to do before the prestige and profits of the larger gallery took over. It hadn't been easy. There were days I was certain divorce was inevitable, nights when the images of her with Ashford threatened to destroy any progress we'd made. But slowly, deliberately, we'd begun to rebuild. Not the marriage we had before, but something new. Something stronger because it was based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. There, Caroline said, stepping back from the painting. What do you think? It works, I replied, coming to stand beside her, close but not touching. She glanced at me, a question in her eyes. We had dinner reservations at the Italian place where we'd had our first date 20 years ago. Not an anniversary celebration. We weren't there yet, but an acknowledgement of the history between us, both good and bad. Ready to go? I asked. She nodded, gathering her coat. As I locked the office door behind us, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Still on for fishing next weekend? I typed back quickly, wouldn't miss it. Caroline and I walked to the restaurant, the evening air crisp with early autumn. We didn't hold hands. Some gestures would take more time to reclaim, but we walked in step, matching our pace to each other as we navigated this new territory between us. I didn't know what the future held for us. Trust, once broken, never quite reforms the same way. But I did know this. 20 years of history deserved the chance we were giving it. The chance to build something honest from the wreckage of what came before. And for now, that was enough.